For 15 years, Daniel Hartley told himself that leaving his mother behind in Millhaven was the only way to survive. He told himself she understood. He told himself she forgave him the moment he stepped onto that bus. But on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, sitting in a corner office 3 states away, his phone rang with a number he had deleted years ago and somehow still remembered by heart. And in that single moment, every excuse he had built for himself over a decade and a half came crashing down at once. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Daniel Hartley grew up in Millhaven, a small town tucked between cornfields and a slow-moving river, the kind of place where everybody knew your name and your business before you did. His mother, Eleanor Hartley, raised him alone after his father walked out when Daniel was 6 years old, leaving behind nothing but unpaid bills and a note that simply said he was sorry. Eleanor worked double shifts at the diner on Main Street, coming home smelling like coffee and bacon grease, her feet swollen, her hands cracked from dishwater, but she never once complained in front of her son. She wanted him to believe the world was kinder than it actually was. By the time Daniel turned 18, he had one goal burned into his mind, and that was to leave Millhaven and never look back. He saw his mother's exhaustion as a warning, a preview of what waited for him if he stayed. He got into a state college 200 miles away on a partial scholarship, and the day he packed his bags, Eleanor stood on the porch with a smile so wide it looked like it might crack her face in half. She told him to go build the life she never got to have. She told him not to worry about her. What she did not tell him was how much of his tuition she had quietly covered herself, working extra shifts nobody asked her to work, taking out a loan against the only thing she owned outright, the small house Daniel grew up in. For the first 2 years, Daniel called every Sunday. He wrote letters describing his classes, his roommates, the strange food in the cafeteria. Eleanor kept every single one of those letters in a shoebox under her bed, reading them so often the folds began to tear. But slowly, the calls became shorter. The letters became rare. Daniel graduated, took a job in the city, and told himself he would send for her once he was settled. Once he had saved enough. Once things were stable. Years passed under that same sentence, repeated so many times it stopped meaning anything at all. By his 10th year in the city, Daniel had a corner office, a condo overlooking the skyline, and a version of success that Millhaven could never have offered him. But somewhere in the climb, the promise to send for his mother had quietly disappeared, replaced by silence he told himself was temporary. Eleanor never called to guilt him. She never once mentioned money or asked why he stopped visiting. She simply kept living in that small house on Cedar Street, tending the garden, waving at neighbors, telling anyone who asked that her son was doing wonderful things out there in the world. Underneath that pride, though, was a woman quietly counting the years since she had last held her only child. When Daniel's phone rang that Tuesday afternoon, he almost let it go to voicemail out of habit, the way he did with unfamiliar numbers. Something made him answer. The voice on the other end was friendlier than he remembered, slower, but unmistakably hers. She did not open with blame. She did not ask where he had been for 15 years. She simply asked if he could come home, because there was something she needed to tell him in person, something she had been carrying alone for a very long time and could no longer carry by herself. Daniel sat frozen at his desk, his coffee going cold, his mind racing through 15 years of missed birthdays, missed holidays, and unanswered letters he had told himself he would respond to later. He booked a flight for the next morning without telling his assistant why he was canceling every meeting on his calendar. On the drive from the airport into Millhaven, the town looked smaller than his memory of it. The diner repainted, the old movie theater boarded shut, but Cedar Street was exactly where he left it. Eleanor was sitting on the same porch, thinner than he remembered, her hair fully gray now, a blanket over her knees despite the warm afternoon. She did not stand to greet him. She simply patted the seat beside her, the way she used to when he was a boy and needed to talk something through. What she told him that afternoon was not what Daniel expected. She was not sick, not in the way he feared during the entire flight. Instead, she told him about the loan she had taken against the house all those years ago to cover the gap in his tuition, a loan she had spent a decade quietly paying off through extra shifts and skipped meals, never once mentioning in a single letter because she did not want him to feel the weight of a debt he never asked her to carry. She told him the bank had finally cleared the loan 3 months earlier, and that in going through the old paperwork, she found every letter he had ever written her, and reading them again made her realize how much of his life she had missed simply by choosing silence over asking him to come home. Daniel sat on that porch in stunned silence, the weight of 15 years pressing down on him all at once. He had built an entire narrative in his mind where his absence was simply the natural cost of ambition, a fair trade his mother had accepted without complaint. He never once considered that her silence was not peace, but sacrifice dressed up as pride, a mother protecting her son from guilt even as she quietly paid for the life he was building far away from her. The shame did not arrive as anger. It arrived as grief, for the years neither of them would ever get back, and for a truth that had been sitting in a shoebox under a bed the entire time he assumed everything was fine. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting, no accusations thrown across the porch. Instead, Eleanor reached over and took her son's hand, the same way she used to when he was small and afraid of the dark, and told him that she was not calling to make him feel guilty. She was calling because she was tired of carrying the story alone, and because she wanted to see her son's face one more time before either of them ran out of chances to make things right. Daniel stayed in Millhaven for 3 weeks after that conversation, longer than he had stayed in 15 years combined, repainting the porch, fixing the leaking gutter, sitting beside his mother in the evenings while she told him stories he had never heard before. He did eventually return to the city, because life and work do not simply pause for redemption, but something fundamental had shifted. The calls became weekly again, then became visits every few months, then eventually became a standing arrangement where Daniel spent every major holiday back in Millhaven, in the same house his mother had quietly protected for him without ever asking for anything in return. Eleanor never got those 15 years back, and neither did Daniel, but what they built afterward was something neither of them expected to find again. A relationship rebuilt not on guilt, but on the simple decision to stop letting silence do the talking. Looking back, Daniel often says the hardest part was not the 15 years of distance, but the moment he realized his mother's silence had never meant acceptance. It meant sacrifice. It meant a woman who loved her son enough to let him believe the distance cost her nothing, when in truth it cost her almost everything she had. If there is one thing this story leaves behind, it is a simple question worth sitting with. Whether the people who never complain about our absence are truly fine, or whether they are simply protecting us from a truth we are not ready to hear. What do you think would have happened if Eleanor had never made that call? And if this story moved you, wait until you hear what happened when a father discovered the real reason his daughter stopped answering his calls. Subscribe if you believe it is never too late to make things right with the people who raised us.